Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Prose Edda. Now, today we are going to get back into this, and we will be starting with part 4, the journeys of my eyeballs don't want to work. Garrett's courts. Then Aegir said, "To me, Hrungnir seems to have been extremely powerful. And did Thor work with the other great any other great feats to his dealings with the Trolls?" Bragi replied, "The story of Thor's journey to Gerad's courts is well worth the telling. Loki was with him on the journey, and because of Loki, Thor did not have the hammer Mjolnir, his belt of strength, or his iron gloves. This was because of what happened to Loki earlier when, in order to amuse himself, he put on Frigg's falcon shape, and then, driven by curiosity, he flew into Gerad's courts. Seeing there was a giant hall, he landed and looked in through a window. But Gerard looked in his direction and then commanded that the bird be seized and brought to him. The henchman charged with doing so, however, had trouble climbing up the wall of the hall because it was so high. Loki was amused to see so much effort expended in getting to him, so he delayed flying away until the man had almost finished the difficult climb. Just as the man rushed at him, he finally started to fly. He beat his wings, but discovered that his feet were stuck fast. So Loki was seized and brought to the giant Gerard. When Gerard looked into the bird's eyes, he suspected that it was a person and demanded that it answer him. But Loki remained silent. When Gerard locked Loki in a chest, starving him there for 3 months. This time, when Gerard lifted him out and asked him to speak, Loki told him who he was. As ransom for his life, he swore to Gerard an oath that would devise a way to bring Thor to Gerard's courts, and that Thor would have neither his hammer nor his belt of strength. Thor came to stay at the giantess named Grid as a guest for the night, but she was mother of Vidar the Silent. She told Thor the truth about Gerard, that he was a cunning giant and that there was much in danger in dealing with him. She lent Thor a belt of strength and iron gloves, which she owned. She also lent him her staff, Gridarvol, or Grid staff. Thor then traveled to the river Vimir, a great waterway. He buckled his belt of strength and supported himself against the current by placing Grid's pole on the downstream side, while Loki held on to the belt of power. But when Thor got to the middle of the river, the water had risen so high that it reached his shoulders. Then Thor spoke his verse. Rise not, Vimir, as I want to wade you, crossing into the giant's courts. Beware if you grow, divine might will grow in me as high as heaven. Thor looked up and saw a certain cleft Gjalp, the daughter of Geirrod, straddling the river with one leg on either side, and it was she who, with causing the river to rise, then took a large stone from the river and threw it at her, saying, At the source will the river be stemmed. He did not miss his target. Just then, as he swept towards the shore, where he was able to grab a hold of some rowan branches, and so this was the climb up from the river. This event is the origin of the expression that Rowan times are Thor's salvation. When Thor arrived at Geirrod's, he and his companions were first directed to a goat shed as their lodgings. There was only one chair, and Thor sat on it. But he soon noticed that his chair under him was rising towards the roof. He took Grid's pole up into the rafters and pushed down hard on the chair. Then came the sound of a loud crack, followed by a loud scream. Geirrod's daughters, Gjalp and Gret, they had been under the chair and he had broken both their backs. Then Geirrod said, Thor called into the Thor called into the hall for contests. Large fires were burning down the length of the hall, and Thor approached until he stood opposite Geirrod with his tongs. Geirrod grabbed a glowing piece of iron and threw it at Thor. Thor caught the red-hot piece in the iron gloves, and lifting it into the air, he threw it back at Geirrod. who ran behind the iron pillar to save himself. But the lump of glowing metal was thrown in such a way that it pierced the pillar, and then Gerard himself before crashing through the wall and landing on the ground outside. Part 7. The dwarves make treasures for the gods. Why is a god called Sif's, or why is gold called Sif's hair? As a prank, Loki, son of Laufey, cut off all Sif's hair. When Thor learned of this, he grabbed hold of Loki and would have broken every bone in his body had Loki not sworn to find a way to get the Dark Elves to make hair from gold for Sif, which would grow like any other hair. Then Loki went to those dwarves called the Sons of Ivaldi, and they made the hair Skidbladnir, and Odin's spear called Gungnir. Loki then wagered his head with the dwarf named Brock that Eitri, Brock's brother, could not make 3 treasures equally as good. When they entered the smithy, Eitri placed a pigskin on the forge. He told Brock to work the bellows and not let up until Eitri had removed from the forge that he had put into it. But as soon as Eitri left the smithy and other began to pump the air, and the other began to pump the air, a fly landed on Brock's head and hit him. Brock continued nevertheless to work the bellows as before and kept on until the smith pulled the work from the forge. It was a boar with bristles of gold. Next, Eitri put gold in the forge. He asked the other to work the bellows and not to stop pumping until he returned. And then, and this time, it bit twice as hard. Still, Brock continued to pump until the smith took from the forge a gold ring, the one called Dropnir. Then the smith placed iron in the forge, telling the other to pump air and with the bellows. He said that his work would be ruined if the bellows failed. This time the fly landed between Brock's eyes, biting his eyelids. Finally, the blood flowing into his eyes, he was unable to see. So as quickly as he could, he took his hand from the bellows with a downstroke and swatted the fly away. At that moment, the smith returned and said that everything in the forge had just barely escaped ruin. Then he took his hammer from the forge and, entrusting all the treasures to his brother Brock, he asked him to go to Asgard to settle the wager. When Brock and Loki arrived and displayed their treasures, the Aesir took their places on the thrones of fate. Odin Thor and Frey were to be the judges, thus settling the matter. Loki gave to Odin the spear Gungnir, and to Thor the hair for Sif, and to Frey Skidbladnir. He then described the characteristics of each of the treasures. The spear always pierced cleanly through, never stopping during the thrust. The hair would grow fast to the skin as soon as it came onto Sif's head, and Skidbladnir would receive a fair wind whenever its sail was raised, no matter where it was going. It could also be folded up like a cloth and put into one's pouch, if so desired. Brock then brought out his treasures. He gave the ring to Odin, saying that every night 8 rings of equal weight would drip from it. To Frey he gave the boar, remarking that night or day it could race across the sky and over the sea better than any other mount. Furthermore, night would never be as so murky, nor the worlds of darkness so shadowy that the boar could not provide light wherever it went. So bright was the shining of its bristles. Then he gave the hammer to Thor, and before him with as mighty a blow as he wished, because the hammer would never break. And if he decided to throw the hammer, it would never miss its mark, nor could it ever be thrown so far that it would not find its way back home to his hand. It was also so small that if he wished, he could keep it inside his shirt. There was, however, one defect. The handle was rather short. It was the judgment that the hammer was the best of all treasures, and that it provided the best protection against the frost giants. Therefore, they decided that the dwarf had won the wager. Loki then asked to be allowed to ransom his head, but the dwarf replied that there was no hope of that. "Catch me then," said Loki. But when the dwarf tried to grab hold of him, Loki was already far away. Loki had shoes that allowed him to race through the air and over the sea. The dwarf told Thor that he should catch Loki, and Thor did so. The dwarf wanted to cut off Loki's head, but Loki said that the dwarf had a right to his head, but not to the neck. The dwarf took a narrow strip of leather and a knife. He intended to cut holes in Loki's lips, and so the mouth shut. But the knife would not cut. The dwarf said that it would be better if his brother All was there. No sooner had he mentioned it than the All was there, and it punched holes through the lips. He then stitched the lips together before ripping away the outer edges. The thong sewing shut Loki's mouth is called Valtari. Part 6. Aegir's Feast. Okay, why is gold called the fire of Ager? The story is that Ager was, as mentioned previously, came as a guest to the to Asgard, and when he was ready to return home, he invited Odin and all the gods to visit him in 3 months. Odin, Njord, Frey, Tyr, Bragi, Vidar, and Loki went on this journey, and with them were the goddesses Frigg, Freya, Gefjun, Skadi, Idun, and Sif. Thor was not among them. He had gone to the east to kill Trolls. When the gods had taken their seats, Aegir commanded that gleaming gold be brought in and placed on the floor of the hall. It lit up the hall, shining like fire, and was used for light at his feast, and in the manner of swords, in the manner of that swords replaced fires for light in Valhalla. Then Loki exchanged insults with all the gods, and he killed Fimithang, Aegir's slave. Another of Aegir's slaves was called Eldir. Ron was the same, the name of Aegir's wife, and they had 9 daughters. At the feast, everything, the food, the ale, and all the necessary tableware were served itself. Then the Aesir became aware that Ran had a net, and with it she caught all the men who came into the sea. This story explains why gold is called the fire, or the light of the brightness of Aegir, Ran, or Aegir's daughters. But yeah, we'll go ahead and end this episode there. I'm sorry I could not read worth anything. My eyes did not want to function correctly. But we're seeing a lot more of who the gods are. And the behavior. Thor, he's aggressive. He threw uh, the molten iron, through the pillar, and it went through the pillar, through the giant. And then we see Loki's tendency to be a trickster, running his mouth. You know, he would make these bets, he loses, but unwilling to confirm the bet he made, often would make things worse by trying to pay what he owed. In the one particular story, he was supposed to have his head taken, so he ended up, by not willing to have his head taken, had his lips sewn shut. And then we had that particular story showing why gold is called Aegir's fire, which is just the light shone from it so much it was like a fire. But yeah. Ah, some more tales. The reason I stopped there is the next part. Otter's Ransom, the Rhine Goat, and Sigurd, the Dragon Slayer. Yeah, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Woo! Well, it's multiple pages. What I'm trying to say. Yeah. Page 95 to 102. The one after that is not so bad. And then we have part 9. Which is not too bad. We get a look at poetic references. References to men, references to go. So we're close to finishing the book here. I mean, as you can see, it's just a little sliver of pages for the stories, and then we get the appendixes for the book. The Norse cosmos and the world tree, the language of the skalds, Hennings and Haiti, Eddic poems used as sources in Gylfaginning, genealogical tables, so I'm sure a lot of this is information that they picked up from other sources, because you got to remember, this is 2 major books. The Gylfaginning and the Skald's Skaparmal. So yeah, we're pretty close to the end of the stories and everything. I don't think I'll read out the appendixes and genealogical tables. I might read the references list. Because it talks about where references are made to man, where references are made to gods. But yeah, that'll be it for now. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.